get started shortly. Hi everyone. My name is Charlotte Vorwald. I am a PhD candidate in biomedical engineering. I am a UC Davis Professors for the Future Fellow in the 2019 to 2020 cohort. I have here Dr. David Blancha. He's an assistant director of the UC Davis Graduate Pathways Institute for Professional Development, and he'll be helping out with moderation of this call. So overall, this webinar is focused, it's the second webinar of a two-part series focused on Beyond the Podium, getting the most out of academic conferences. The first one last week was about preparing for conference before attendance. So that explained the logistics behind presentation types for your professional goals, as well as the main logistics behind funding and attendance. Now this one will focus on increasing engagement while attending these conferences, and particularly focused on networking. So we'll be discussing with two panelists who I will introduce shortly, who have great insights on that aspect of attending these venues. So first, I'll introduce these panelists, and then we're gonna get to know the audience a little bit. I'll provide some polls, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. I'll ask them a couple questions, or then we'll open it up to the audience to ask any questions that you may have, and feel free to include that in the chat, and we'll make sure to address as many as we can throughout. I'd like to welcome our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited what you'll have to offer in this discussion. I'd first like to introduce Dr. Bethany Hopkins. She is a senior career advisor for master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral scholars at the UC Davis Internship and Career Center. She earned her PhD in history from UC Davis in 2015, where her dissertation research focused on women-run farms in California during the turn of the 20th century. She joined the Internship and Career Center staff in 2018 and offers one-on-one confidential career advising appointments for grad students and postdocs in any field on all career-related topics. And this is currently done via phone or Zoom. So thank you so much, Bethany, for being here. We also have Dr. Eleonora Grandi. FHRS is an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacology, a School of Medicine Dean's Fellow in Precision Medicine, and a Chancellor's Fellow at the University of California, Davis. She earned her Master's of Science degree in Electronics Engineering in 2003 and PhD in Bioengineering in 2007 at the University of Bologna, and then pursued postdoctoral training at the Department of Physiology, Loyola University Chicago, and Department of Pharmacology at UC Davis. LA joined the faculty at the Department of Pharmacology in 2014 and was granted tenure in 2018. She currently leads a stellar group of researchers that utilizes math and high performance computing to understand how the heart works and what goes wrong when the heart beats irregularly, causing potentially deadly cardiac arrhythmias. Their lab uses models to complement and accelerate experimental research and reduces the uses of animal testing with the goal of understanding disease mechanisms and informing treatment. As a first-generation college graduate woman in STEM, she is also deeply involved in service and mentoring aimed at increasing equity and inclusion in access to higher education, as well as recruitment and retention of a diverse staff and faculty workforce. Thank you, Ella, for joining us as well. So I'm really excited. Both are great advocates for academics, for professional development and STEM alike. So I'm really excited for what we will be discussing today. So first, I'd like to get to know the audience as well, to see who is here. So I'll be sharing a Mentimeter to poll. And I'll explain the logistics behind this. So for the audience members, if you could go to menti.com and use the code provided here, 443147. And we want to see what your level is to help initiate this discussion. Okay, great. So we have a lot of graduate students here. That's wonderful. Great, so we have a mix of postdocs and graduate students, so this will be really helpful for multiple levels. I also wanted to see what department and our graduate group are you affiliated with, to see, you know, in terms of field, who we have in the audience. And this is just a free write answer. Great, so we have a really great mix of both the humanities as well as STEM fields as well. Great. Well, thank you for participating. Yeah, we have a great mix of levels and fields. So I'd like to start up with some initial questions that I think will help with the discussion. And then again, after you start, feel free to ask any questions. So I'd first like to ask the panelists, each of you, I know networking is a pretty broad term, even in these academic conference settings. And I was wondering how each of you define networking and what does networking mean to you?
Perhaps I get started. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, thanks so much, Charlotte, for organizing this, and I hope I will be able to give a contribution. I also want to, just as a disclaimer, I think I did lots of dons in networking, or I probably, better to say, I avoided networking for as much as I could during my training. And I have come to appreciate the benefits of networking, probably when I decided to settle for the definition that worked for me. So I looked at the dictionary actually, and the definition of networking that you get from the dictionary is the exchange of information or services among individuals, groups, or institutions. Specifically, is the cultivation of productive relationships for employment or business. And I think that to me, maybe the misconception I had about networking was that it was really only about making connections and going to cocktails and talk to people, make small talks so that more people will get to know you. But really what settled then for me was what made networking attractive for me was really the idea to engage in this series of activities that of course need to begin with some initial contact, but then really lead to a mutually beneficial partnership and definitely kind of a long-term investment in this mutually beneficial partnership. I don't want to keep my answers too long, but I can any follow-up.
I guess I'll go next. And again, thank you, Charlotte, for organizing this. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Mm-hmm. Great. I had to switch headphones. My other ones just died. I'd say my definition of networking is actually pretty similar. It would be cultivating mutually beneficial professional relationships. And I want to echo what you just said, Elia, that it's really a lifelong practice. It's not what you typically think of in terms of there's me trying to pitch myself at this one event with a bunch of people around at this one time high stakes situation. That's really not what it is. It's about building and maintaining the kind of relationships, the professional relationships that are going to grow and change as you grow in the profession. And so it might look a little bit different when you're earlier on in your career and you're just starting to meet people in your field. It may be more about maintaining those over the years, but it really doesn't have to be a one time or high stakes or only for extroverts sort of thing. For me, it very much is something that I tend to do more one-on-one or small groups, whether it's at a conference or just on my own. And so that's how I would define it for me. And I would also say that I've come to appreciate it more over time, and that at first I really struggled with how to make that work in a way that felt true to who I was.
Mm-hmm. Hey, thank you. Yeah, I really like that perspective. I think it also alleviates a lot of the stress behind it, realizing it is this mutual benefit relationship. So yeah, you had mentioned how it has grown to understand it. So how has your perspective of networking changed as your career has progressed? Bethany, sorry, direct the questions.
Sure. I think that I see networking more as building on what kind of connections do we have and what kind of conversations do I want to have. And so at a conference, that may have to do a little bit with why you're there. You know, if there's something specific you're presenting, it may have to do with who you already know and building from there. But for me, it's about what do I have in common with this person? Do we have a shared, concerns or shared goals? Do we have an interest in the same part of the field? Is there something else that we might, someone else that we know that we already have in common that connects us? So those connections, those are not things that I ignore. I think that I've been more cognizant in realizing that networking is all about thinking through those and both sharing what I've been doing, but also listening and being curious about what other people have been working on and asking questions. So I think that just seeing how those conversations play out, I'd say that I have thought a little bit more deeply about that instead of just thinking, oh no, I don't have anything to offer. I don't know what I should say here. I don't know how to present myself. That has become, I think, a little bit less of the thing that I concern myself with. What do we have in common? What are our shared interests or values or sort of goals that might direct what our conversation could be about?
Mm-hmm. So speaking of those goals and kind of having that mindset of those connections, do you set goals before you kind of embark on that, seeking those connections? And if so, how do you frame them? And I'd like to ask both of you this.
Maybe I can answer first. Yeah, so I think that because I'm an introverted and because I was originally kind of skeptical with this business of networking, my connections have always been very deliberate, and they have been most of them planned. And really the approach has been motivated by the goals. So why was I networking? Why was I trying to establish a certain connection? And so initially at the beginning of my career, it was about, when I was in Italy, it was really about finding, I really wanted to do a research experience in the US. And so it was contacting people whose research I knew and I had read, and trying to, get to do this research experience. As a graduate student, it was then also who is going to be my next postdoc lab, what would I like to do, and these kind of things. And so in this case, it was really about knowing what were the things that I, like the goals, like the broader goals in my career, knowing what my value was, which as a person who's also had imposter syndrome and still has, was also a difficult thing to kind of achieve, to just, be able to define my value for myself and be able to communicate it to others. And then it was really like being prepared and studying and make sure I could communicate my value and how this mutually beneficial partnership could really also be envisioned for the other party. So initially, for example, a potential postdoc mentor or something like this. Right now, I'm way older than 15 years ago when I did my postdoc or when I started my postdoc. Of course, networking now for me means many different things. It means still trying to get my brand out there so that people can invite me to, chair conferences, speak at conferences. They are going to read my papers and my grants, and they're going to be nice to me for all of these reasons. But then I also need to have, to recruit people in my lab. And so here it's probably been a PI now that I better understand this idea of the mutual benefit that in a mentor-mentee or sponsor relationship can be really achieved. So yeah, I think the best type of maybe do's that I want to share is really try to be yourself and really try to make networking work for who you are. You do not need to impersonate someone else. You do not need to become an extroverted if you're introverted, or vice versa.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit as well. In terms of goals, I don't know if I was always intentional about like the specific goals, but I did maybe look for the opportunities depending on what conference I was at or who was going to be there. And I'll give the example from when I was a graduate student in history and I was going to the Western History Association conference. And I realized my advisor would be there as well. And I asked if he would be willing to introduce me to other people that he knew. I was interested in presenting more at conferences, and he was able to introduce me to someone who was doing similar work, who was a professor who was interested in putting together a panel. We never would have had that conversation otherwise. He was really very comfortable with networking and very well connected at that association, and I wasn't. It was my first time at that conference. And so my goal there was pretty much just to start meeting people who were doing similar work and start those conversations. And now the conferences that I go to are for my field now, for graduate career advising. So it's the Graduate Career Consortium. That's our professional association. So there I might be more trying to connect with other professionals in my field to see if they're working on similar things or coming across similar issues. For example, teaching a graduate level career course. Who else is doing it? Who else has done similar things? What works? What doesn't? And so now I'm trying to build those relationships. So I think the goals really need to be based on you, what's comfortable for you to do and what you're working on and what your needs are for that conference, for that field, for whatever is the thing that's kind of the next thing for you to think about. But it really can work even if you are an introvert, even if you are not the person who's going to be going up and introducing yourself to strangers, if you can find the connection.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like that changing of kind of setting your networking goals based on yourself. I know I get into the mindset of like having to be a certain way that's not really who I am. Speaking of the interaction with other people, I love that idea of reaching out to people who are really good at networking to kind of initiate that start. I feel like now, as we're well aware on this webinar, that finding connections has been, or maintaining them has been particularly difficult during this time. And I was wondering, each of you, if have you seen certain conferences move to more of a virtual way of connecting everyone, given the circumstances of this pandemic? And if so, how have you seen this transition? LA, if you could start.
Yeah, so what I can share is I was supposed to attend 4 conferences over the past couple of months, and all of them have been, of course, canceled. None of them has been really moved online, except for the Heart Rhythm Society conference, which is a huge international conference of cardiology, basically. So there are a lot of medical doctors in addition to basic research. They have attempted to propose an online curriculum that is going to be, though, kind of asynchronous. So we have been invited to submit our presentations, but there is not going to be any real conference going on, so people can access the material. And I have to say that when this happened, I wasn't too motivated, and I also am sharing, I work half of the time now because I have a toddler at home that needs care. And so I just felt that was not the most important thing on my to-do list, and I kind of skipped it. But a colleague of mine has actually organized like ex novo, so there was no cancellation, but he, for the International Society of Heart Research, so this is a kind of, again, an international society, and it's more basic research on the heart. He has organized a daily webinar series, and that this apparently has been very successful. He has tried to encompass 2 or 3 different time zones, for sure, the US and Europe. And they do like daily seminars, which have been pretty successful. I hear. I've only connected for maybe a couple of them. And they can take questions, very similar to this webinar. They take questions on a chat, and they were doing like this. What I read yesterday, because I came prepared for this webinar, was that there was a neuroscience conference. It's called NeuroMatch, that went on, I think, sometimes maybe last month. It was organized by the University of Pennsylvania and Imperial College, and it had 3,000 participants. And they published a short paper on eLife that I read. And so they have found that the participants were particularly happy about 3 improvements. In addition, they consider them improvements as opposed to kind of in-person conferences. One was that everyone was able to see the speaker more clearly than in the lecture theater, which I don't know if it's a pro or a contra, but they consider it a plus. Second, what they said, Crowdcast, which is the online platform that they were using, allowed anyone to submit a question that could be asked to the speaker. And then there was a kind of viewers could vote on the question, so that in the mind of the organizers, this was a more democratic way to be able to let everyone, ask questions, as opposed to only the established professors that would, raise their hands and intimidate everyone else. And the third innovation was that there was a chat to the side, and people could ask clarifying questions in the chat. So then other viewers could, without interrupting the talk, could, you know, help clarifying that point, so then everyone just could have a better, you know, understanding of what was presented. And within this conference, they also organized one-on-one meetings because they recognized that the lack of in-person conference, the lack of potential one-on-one interaction. And so they use the software, and I like this because they use a modeling approach to match people based on the abstracts. And so they had like break rooms with like 15-minute one-on-one interactions between meeting participants. And so the organizers also discussed how these virtual conferences are definitely easier to organize. They cost nothing to the attendees, but also in order to organize, they say they spent some money for the software itself, but like hundreds of dollars. And also they were making the point that it's really kind of also, it removes many barriers to participation in conferences, which have to do with, you know, family duties. There is definitely gender bias, limited funding, travel bans, which we've also been, you know, been seeing. And so, you know, and of course, it also decreases our carbon footprint, which is another, I think, important consideration. So this is my homework.
Thank you. That's really great insights onto that transition. Bethany, have you seen conferences? Have you experienced or seen any of a similar transition to that virtual environment?
Yeah, I will just go quickly. I've really just seen larger, kind of a similar thing to what Ele was saying, larger conferences that are canceling or postponing, or moving it to kind of these smaller webinar-based formats, like more regular, like more often, but smaller, not trying to reproduce the entire size and scope of a larger conference. And I have seen a few of the same things that Ele mentioned about how you can, like you can have conversations in the chat that maybe wouldn't have happened, someone wouldn't have raised their hand. I've sort of seen that just like in a small way in my own conference, regional conference participation. I don't know what the future holds for those. I don't know if anyone really does. I am glad to see that there's benefits, but there's definitely drawbacks to trying to do a virtual conference as well. So I'm kind of just in a wait and see space for those. I do think it is completely possible to find people who were going to be attending those conferences, or who maybe they were still posted, who was planned to go to those, who you saw their, you know, what they were going to present on, or their poster looked interesting, and reach out and say, I wanted to, can we talk? Can we schedule our own call? It might seem weird to do that, but this may have been the person you wanted to talk to or connect to at that conference anyway. And it, you know, it might be something to consider if it's worth making your own intentional connections to people that you would have wanted to have those conversations with at those conferences that were scheduled for spring or summer that have been canceled would have gone forward.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Do you primarily try to network up? For example, if I'm a graduate student, should I be trying to network more with professors? If I find it much easier to talk to my peers, but I'm not sure if that relationship could be mutually beneficial for advancing either of our careers.
Okay, I'll take this. I can start it, that's okay. So I think that I network up, down, and at the same level. So I can give maybe specific examples, but you definitely want to network with your peers, because they're gonna be your allies, and you never know, but there will be the day in which you need an ally or multiple allies. So in my case now as a faculty member, I have a lot of allies. A lot of time I have disagreements with my chair, or I want certain priorities for my department. I need allies at the level of the faculty, for example, to try and get these priorities, you know, on the table to be discussed. I network up because I still need mentors, but especially at this point, I need sponsors. I am also very fortunate, I have to say, so a lot of sponsors happen to find me. I don't know how that happened exactly, but I guess because people do mentor down, if you know, in this, using the language that is used here. If you're a graduate student, and I network down because I think another, like I'm a helper. I think that's what my inner self is. And so I think seeking opportunity to help others is also a good way to network, and it can be mutually beneficial. If you're a graduate student, I think it's important to definitely network with your peers. You will find, help in many ways. I remember I always tell my students to practice their QE with their peers, but then also with professors, because your peers are too nice and they're never going to tell you the whole truth. And so, yes, you want to network up with professors, because also these professors can be your not only your mentors, but in certain situations, your allies, for example. I also serve as a graduate student advisor for the MCIP program. And I honestly consider myself, I mean, I don't feel that students that I advise are networking up when talking with me. I think we have a relationship in which I advocate for them, and they can trust me that everything that is said in my office is confidential, and I just try to make their best interest. Yeah.
I'd like to add that as a graduate student, you do have something to offer. It's something that it's often hard to see that about yourself, but you already do. The work you're doing, the people you've already met as a graduate student, the research that you've learned about, like the newest stuff that you've been doing in your coursework or like in your early stages of your research, yet people want to know about this. Like, it's hard to see when it seems like everyone else is more experienced, but you do actually have something of value to offer. So first of all, just don't discount that. And as far as where you should be networking, I think that it's helpful to think of it at just like multiple levels of people. And people are often moving around too, and you may find that someone that used to be a peer around another graduate student that you met is, I'll say in one example, that person went and took an assistant professorship and then had graduate students and then referred one of them to me because our research was similar so that we could connect. Like, it's not necessarily just about levels up or down. It's about figuring out who is the person you should talk to, depending on what you're working on and what your interests are and what you're going to be doing next. And it can actually be mutually beneficial, even if you can't see quite where that's going yet. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm hoping it can help you sort of reframe that approach.
I think we have another question, but I think both of you had already kind of addressed this. How can I find out if a working relationship will benefit the person I want to network with? And it seems like knowing your value and understanding that you do, that mindset definitely changes that. We also have another question. I'm an introvert, and when I asked an extroverted professor for advice on how to network, I was told to go and talk to people. What does this actually mean into a plan of action?
Yeah, so maybe keeping it to the conference issue. If you're going to a conference and you want to network, what I normally do, and I still do it now, I look at the program of the conference and I pick out the presentations or abstracts that I think are going to be interesting. And then if I now imagine when I was a graduate student, what I would do at that point is to send an email to the person who's going to present and ask whether we can have a meeting after, well, depending. If it's a poster presentation, I'm going to say, I'm going to be at your poster. you know, or would you like to discuss at any other time? If I have something that I want also to share with this person, then I would make sure that we can set some time aside in order to have this conversation. And so at conferences, for me, like an email always worked better than just, you know, showing up and trying to maybe show 25 slides to someone who doesn't know who I am, and I just showed up like this. Also, my introverted self thought, if this person doesn't respond, I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna bother. But if you want to network with anybody in your department or on your campus, it's the same thing. You can ask, you can send an email and say, do you have, you know, can I have office, can I come to your office? And well, not office, but Zoom. Can I discuss something with you? And it could be, I have some data that I want to share with you. Or like, I am really interested in your technique, or I'm really interested in your data. Can we have a discussion? So always send an email that allows the other person to understand what you're seeking and what you can potentially offer. So, you know, you introduce yourself and you explain why you would like to start that connection.
And I would do much the same thing. I'd look at a conference, like, to see who is doing what posters, what presentations, think about who's doing interesting work that I just want to see and maybe connect to, and who I already know that I want to catch up with, that I just, you know we've talked in the past. Maybe I knew them as a graduate student or something and I want to catch up, kind of a mix of that. And then I'd also say, and people have different levels of comfort with this, but there are people at some conferences, especially the conferences that have had like hashtags that people can follow on Twitter, people who are actively posting about their activity at the conference, about, you know, panels or the plenary or whatever that they went to, and following them and connecting on there. I've sometimes had some luck with making that online connection on Twitter first, and then being like, oh, great, I'm gonna see what this person is doing, and maybe that's a person who they've already kind of made themselves more public of a scholar, and so I can go ahead and connect to that person. That might be a little bit easier for me, feel like I know them a little bit. And I know that really depends on your fields and the conference, that's not necessarily true for all of them, but I'd say that was something that I sometimes found helpful as a first step to connecting.
I kind of wanted to add something that kind of addresses this question and also the previous question about, should I kind of network with other grad students? And so one thing that we have recently started at UC Davis is the student chapter of the Biophysical Society. And so I think that, and so biophysics enthusiasts, both undergraduate and graduate students, have come together, and with the help of the society, they have got some money and they are organizing networking events, so like social mixers, scientific poster presentation and stuff like this. And because they have this little money, I think by coming together, not only they're networking among themselves, but for example, now they have money to invite a speaker, for example. So this is another way in which you are, again, not only networking among your peers, but also you're joining forces to, for example, network outside of the institution, and also, again, using the same words that was used before, network up. So inviting, you know, an expert in some area of interest that, of course, would rotate. We just started. I'm actually happen to be the faculty mentor of the student chapter, and it's been so far really cool.
Great. So you both have discussed a lot of different ways to reach out. Is it context driven on how you reach out to that person? It seems like there's a lot of different ways to connect with people, and is it more on like what you're comfortable with, or
I mean, it's a difficult one, right? Because there is your style, and then there is the other people's style. So finding the way to connect might really change depending on who is that you are trying to connect with. I have to say, for me, because I am an introverted, I have to say that all of the people that I have connected with now are friends. So like the connection has not only been professional, but has also become personal, just because I cannot do different. Like, this is who I am. I cannot, know someone and, engage in this long-term investment without also sharing, everything else. But then, of course, there are also people that do not care to have any deeper connection with you. And so you kind of then make a decision, like, do I want to just take what I can, or I just, you just go away. And that's what I tend to do, just because that's who I am. But, clearly the world does not revolve around, the way that I think. And there are a lot of people that can separate and can have personally respectful and meaningful professional relationships.
I really like that you said that, LA, because that's also often been true for me, that like some of the stronger professional connections are people that I also just like want to talk to as humans. And it's okay, like we are humans, so that's a part of networking. So it's just like caring about and being curious about the other person if they seem comfortable with that. But I think it also means that, I'm not quite sure how to say this other than, if you're afraid that you won't network perfectly, that you won't say the right thing or connect in the right way, send the exact right message, or find the right person to talk to the right time about their poster, if you're worried about being perfect at it, you're gonna miss those chances. You have to be willing for it to not work out sometimes. Like, if you're afraid of the failure there, I think that'll probably hold you back. Sometimes you will go up and talk to someone at a conference, and the connection won't really be there. There won't be as much to talk about as you thought, or they'll be really busy, or something, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to make that effort to reach out in person or over email and not hear back. If you're afraid of or worried about what if that happens, that's going to prevent you from taking that chance that it might be a good connection. So even if you're an introvert and you're like, I really don't want to take chances with this, like, you probably will have to attempt to make some connections that don't actually go anywhere. That's just okay.
Thank you. That I'm an introvert myself. I find that really helpful. It I think helps with, alleviates a lot of the pressure, and just realizing this is a very human thing to want to connect to people. Feel free to ask more questions in the chat if anyone has any comments or further questions. Speaking of opportunities, there's another question, sorry. Do you have any recommendations for how to initiate an in-person conversation, a professional pickup line, if you will, to make beginning the conversation feel a little more natural?
Pickup line? No, I don't know. So I think that the first thing you want to do is to introduce yourself. And now I cannot even, but so if we're at a conference, the first thing you want to do, you introduce yourself. And then depending on the goal of your, of why you're making that connection, I guess you probably know something about this person. And that something that you know about this person connects you and makes you want to connect. So maybe you say who you are, where you come from, what you do, and then you say, I know that you are, I don't know, an expert in this, or I have read your paper that this, or like, I don't know. That would be my but I'm not very good at this, as you can tell.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's something you get used to as you do more, introducing yourself. Remember, they may not be able to see your name. They do not remember or know automatically what school you're part of. So making sure to make those introductions really clear, or if there's people from multiple fields. So I would, if I was a graduate student, I would make sure I said, my name is Bethany Hopkins. I'm from UC Davis. I'm a PhD student in history. I would try to make that clear. But then, yeah, the important part is the connection. Why do I want to talk to them? So maybe it's, I saw that great presentation you did on the website you built to show some of the data you've been working with on Civil War fatalities. I'm also working with data, but it's about women's vineyards at the same time period. I'm wondering if I want to chat with you more about the way that you presented that, or the archives you used. I might actually think through a little bit about, what do I most want to talk to this person? What do we have in common? And just try to be clear about it. And again, you're gonna have to do it, I think, to just get more used to it. The only way to build those connections is to try it out, really.
And name dropping also works. So if there is a third person that connects the two of you, that might also, I've used that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We both know that person. Yeah.
Kind of going back to the opportunities and just being opportunistic about networking and seizing those. Is there any experience where you wished you had seized an opportunity to network, and if so, if you learned anything from that?
I have to ask you to please repeat the question. I'm sorry, I missed.
Oh, sorry. Is my, I don't know.
I think I just did not.
I can hear you. I think.
Oh, okay. So there was a point brought up about how, important to essentially seize the opportunities as they present themselves for networking to create those connections. Is there an experience where you had later wished you would seize an opportunity to network, but didn't? And if you had that experience, what did you learn from that?
I am sure that I missed tons of opportunities, but I think I was just too naive, or not kind of delusional about it to even realize. Yeah, I know that I spent many dinner conferences by myself. And I remember one in particular in which I was at the Heart Rhythm Society conference. So this is a large conference. It's there are lots of medical doctors. It's maybe, I don't know, 30,000 people, so huge. And I remember I went to the restaurant by myself, and the waiter wanted me to sit at the bar, and I said, no, I want to sit at the table. And then I realized it was my first time eating by myself at the restaurant table, and I realized that was pretty awkward. And so I called my husband, and I was at the time boyfriend, and I spent all night, all dinner, talking on the phone and eating, because I thought this is really weird. And so I kind of laughed about myself, about how, come on, you can, out of 30,000 people, you couldn't find anybody to go to dinner with. But I have to confess, sometimes I still do it now when, I go to conferences and I always know a lot of people, but still sometimes I'm like, it's okay, I'm gonna eat by myself.
I'm sure I've missed opportunities as well. I think it's completely fine to just say, I am done at the end of a long day after traveling, or after being on a Zoom and looking at a million Zoom meetings, whatever it is. I think it's fine. I think you should make yourself feel bad about not taking advantage of every opportunity. I think the thing I wish I'd done more earlier on is just follow the people who seem like they're good people to, just like people who are good to talk to and work with. Not necessarily thinking like, well, they're not quite in the same field as me, so I don't know why we should be talking. If they were interested in what I was doing, or if they were just a good person to talk to, seemed like a genuine, great professional in their field who was warm or thoughtful or just a good conversation. I wish I'd followed that more, because those usually ended up being the kinds of quality connections that mattered more. And so I think in the beginning of going to conferences, I thought too much about like, well, this isn't exactly like my field, so how much do we need to talk more? Or how much should I bother emailing them? But those people, those kind of qualities really do matter. So I pay a lot more attention to that now.
Great. We have a couple more questions. After making that initial contact, how would you go from there to maintain this relationship?
Yeah, so if you meet someone at a conference, first thing to do, of course, when you come back, it's the follow-up email, like a thank you note. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me, to look at my data or to show your data. And then it's a matter of, again, you go to the next conference, you see if this person is gonna go there again, or you send a preemptive email. Are you gonna go to this conference? Or like, this is my schedule for the year. I was trying to decide which conference I should go to. Have you made your plan for the year? Then every time you have something new, like, you publish a paper or you give a presentation, you can share that and you say, you send a link or you send a PDF of your paper. If you have interesting results that, it's okay to share for your PI and you want to discuss them, you ask that as well. And again, know your value. Is there anything that you can do to help? Whatever type of relationship you might have, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be mutually beneficial. And so there might be things that also these other, that your partner in this relationship might need from you or want from you.
There's a lot of questions so far about creating that general initial contact. So when looking for a new position, should we start emailing casually as like general initial contact, or should we already submit a formal email application? So again, going back to kind of ways to connect, I guess in particular for a new position.
So I don't know if there is the right answer to this, right? And I can tell you for my career, this has really been, all of these contacts have been deliberate because it always meant that my family was going with me, and it always meant that the choices were relatively limited. And so like for me, for example, when I was ready to finish my postdoc and get my independent position, for example, there are lots of people that just apply to any potential faculty job. That was not something that I was interested in doing. Number one, because it's absolutely energy consuming. And number two, because it would have been a waste of also the other people's time that had to review my package for them, me not absolutely being interested in working there. And I think for graduate student to postdoc, because I think most of you are graduate student, is exactly the same thing. You just don't want to send out emails to people that you don't know if you want to work with. I think it's more important to do the preparation work, be prepared, first of all, you need to know what you want to do. And then you can try and find who are the people that can allow you to get where you want to get. And then there are issues about, can these people, can these labs that you have identified be the right fit for you? And do they have openings, of course? And then I mean, formal, informal, it's not really, I don't know that that you need to send a formal request. I think that if you are interested in getting a postdoc in a certain lab, you should just introduce yourself and saying, I'm, this is who I am, where I come from, what I have been doing so far, where I want to go, and I think your lab would be a great fit. And you start the conversation. I don't think that there is, I don't know if this is formal or informal way.
Mm-hmm. It seems like, I'm sorry.
I'll just echo that it works much more smoothly if you've already built those connections, that then you can build upon them when you are actually actively looking, as opposed to trying to build and create those at the same time that you're trying to apply. Like, you want to know a little bit more about the people that you're reaching out to ahead of time. Ideally, you can do that first, and instead of not having those connections. So I guess I'll just echo that.
Great, thank you. I think that it also ties, a lot of it is tying it back to knowing your value and that mutual beneficial relationship, and focusing on the connection and what you both bring to the table, to whether that be in that particular question, a new position, or approaching someone at a conference. We have a few more minutes left. I'll open it up again to the chat if anyone has some remaining questions. We have one. When I have tried to meet new people at international conferences, I've not felt my self-confidence, and I usually become shy. I think that it is related to English, is not my mother tongue. However, I do speak it. Please, could you give me any piece of advice to avoid it?
I clearly have not solved this problem for myself. So, yes, so English for me was a big barrier. For all of what I said about my definition of networking, the inability to express, or like the inability to have more than one word to express feelings, or or anything for that matter, was a big barrier. And I think that the confidence really came from knowing, really, I mean, I'm sorry, we are repeating this a lot, but it was really from knowing my value, knowing who I am and what I can bring to the table in any potential partnership. People will be patient even if you do not speak perfect English. People have been patient with me. People have mocked me many times. I used to say, oh, I have clearly I have an accent, I'm Italian, and people would make fun of me because I'm like, did you really think you need to tell us you are Italian? But some of them have become my friends eventually. So it's not really how you say things, it's what you have to say that people will be patient enough to listen. I don't know that there is a solution for it. I think people have suggested that I always start with a joke about my accent, so then we get that, my accent or my ability to speak English, so we get that out of the way. And so yeah, I don't know. I haven't solved that issue.
I don't know that I have a solution to that either, but I will say that if you get chances to practice presenting your research, sharing it like at lower stakes forums, something that's at department level or campus level before you're going to conferences, where you'll get a chance to see what the feedback is and hear what people are interested in asking you more about, that often gave me self-confidence, hearing the kinds of questions like, oh, I really wanted to hear more about this, or can you tell me more about this part of what you're doing? The kinds of questions that I got showed me what people were interested in about what I was doing, and that like built up my confidence for going to bigger conferences and knowing a little bit more about what might interest people, and just being aware that like, yes, previously people have asked me about this, and so I know that this will probably interest folks. That helped me to build up a little.
Great, thank you so much. We are out of time, so I will look at the last few questions, and then I can reach out directly to see how we can help with those. But I, again, would really like to thank Bethany and LA for their time speaking here. I think we all learned a lot about ways to connect, not only later, but also especially during these unprecedented times. I'd also like to thank David for moderating this call. So I will be sending out a feedback form through email to all of you who attended, and also we'll be posting this somehow online. So just keep a heads up for that. But again, thank you all for attending. I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you, Charlotte, for organizing, and David for technical support, and Bethany, thank you for co-paneling.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte and David, for getting this organized. And Elliot, it was nice to talk to you.
Likewise.